You're like,
All right, this is Senate Transportation, and we're resuming our testimony with AOT and public transit. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to jump through these final slides pretty quickly, only in that you indicated I may be afforded an opportunity to be back. And I do want to make sure that I'm yielding some time to Caleb and Jim here, who you've invited as well. So we'll talk next time about how we are trying to ensure geographic equity as we look at the budget awards from 2019 through 2025. The whole message of all these numbers are we're consistent from year to year in the larger growing pie and sharing those larger dollars with our providers. We'll dive into that next time. Grant applications, as I mentioned, are open and 26. And then in the 26 budget plan of action right now is to support GMT's $1.5 million in service adjustments, oversee, $1.5 million in rural service adjustments, realize the efficiencies and potential cost savings from rural transfers through our coordinated implementation assistance plan that is up and running between those parties involved. And then with that data and with that diligence of a reset, we want to approach the VTrans 27 budget committee with that post-COVID, post-inflation number to sustain remaining services and establish the new base or foundation for this program. To do that, we needed to incorporate new federal funds. We brought in $3 million in carbon reduction program funds. We've also brought in $2.9 million for carbon reduction program funds for e-buses and and to support mobility and transportation innovation grant program awards. Those are generally being viewed as one-time funds. We don't know if those will be available in future years. We continue to support the microtransit services, but are asking the microtransit service in Montpelier to consider pre-pilot services that were successful. Our transit app, we had 13,000 users using that to find out where their bus is and where it's going. And we do have the funding was in jeopardy. We halted our EV bus procurements for about 5 business days. And then I received the notice that they can allow us to obligate all of our LODO funds. We're back up and running. Another example of, just some federal uncertainty, but at the end of the day, full steam ahead on our electric bus procurements. Yeah, microtransit pilot. We're now building more microtransit, and you can see Brattleboro here in the middle at $53.58. That is set to be canceled in FY 26. As I mentioned in Montpelier, the real issue isn't
that cost for other reasons.
What's that?
Because
of cost and the lack of local funding. They used grant local funding to stand it up, and we're unable to maintain that. And given the metrics, it looks as though that would be a reasonable adjustment there. In the Montpelier area, it's not so much the cost, but that issue that you discussed or mentioned a little bit earlier, which is many folks are just not getting the response, or we don't have the capacity out there to get people quick 15-minute pickups. And it's a costly service. And so we're asking GMT to consider the pre-pilot program there. The other programs, we don't expect to make any changes in FY 26.
And you don't consider the Gopher program that Capstone is doing of microtransit?
No, that's demand response and done more of a dial-a-ride approach. We do hope for closer coordination between Gopher and GMT through 26, so that any transfer would, they could help with any capacity issues on any future transfer if TDT was to take Washington County.
I guess it's kind of like microtransit, but in the same way that taxi is microtransit.
It's demand response, yeah, right. In taxis, microtransit, dial-a-ride, it's real-time demand response. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was late. So just 2 things on microtransit. I saw it's something that somebody wrote that it makes sense to not overlap microtransit with, fixed route, and I think that is true. You know, and because we want people to get on fixed route, which is a reason fixed route needs to be good, and
I think, did we talk about this?
I've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so I just want to make sure that's said, if nobody has said it.
Thank you.
Because fixed route is much less costly. And it's, at one point when we were talking about microtransit a couple of years ago, the assumption was that, or a few years ago, that it would replace fixed route.
It has replaced.
Well, that can be really challenging because fixed route is a lot easier for people to handle.
Right.
And no, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to call ahead. Some of these you have to call 2 days in advance, which is,
Yeah.
that's not really microtransit. Not what it's supposed to be. Well, hold on. And so fixed route, you just know, you know, especially if you have regular intervals, bus comes at, 7 minutes after and you can be there. And, it's just much more convenient and you can be anonymous. With microtransit, you gotta give them your name usually, which it's just fixed route is good for a reason.
Problems as well.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's
It's a
convenient
plus
if
and
you're
minus.
going to where the routes go.
Well, that's why you have to be really careful about how you do the routes and you have to be responsive and change routes every now and then and update them. I don't want everything to stay as it is. But you just need to have a lot of thought and transit isn't as easy as a road. Like transit, you wouldn't build a road that just went one way and leave it, just something going north and then not have a road going south. That would obviously be foolish. In some cases, we have routes that people can get to work from, you're using, but then they can't get home because the route stops. So it's effectively a one-way route. So we just need to think about transit like that. So that was one point. And then the other one is, what is it? Oh, trains. Do any of those help or overlap when an Amtrak or some other train, but as far as I know, it's just Amtrak passenger train, because passenger train connections is a great thing for microtransit because you do generally know that you need the service in advance. You might be able to charge more. They do that in other states. And you know where you'll be going if you have customers who have signed up to either be taken to the train or taken, to their ultimate destination. And that last mile is a real problem for trains.
What we've seen in our initial takeaways from these key performance indices is that exactly right. Routes that are successful in areas like Montpelier do not generally improve through microtransit. It really is those less traveled circulator in town routes where you're on our headways and you move to the region like it has happened in Morrisville. We consider that a success. Middlebury is the only pilot which has a trunk route, and then they're serving the feeder into that trunk route with a microtransit service. That is another, so whether it's evenings in Brattleboro, the trunk route with Middlebury, the replacement of successful routes in Montpelier, replacement of a successful route in Morrisville, we are learning on the best use of microtransit in Vermont. I'm moving through these so we can get some other folks here. Here's the budget, and it's a little misleading because when you see this 6.2% decrease, it really is due to this $3 million in one-time funds we received last year for the MTI program. And so that's TDM, Transportation Demand Management. We've awarded about 973 of those funds, and we'll have those funds for the next few years. We did add $3 million in carbon reduction funds for operations. That's the key to get us to 27. And we're expecting to obligate a portion of that to GMT Urban to help with their budget shortfall. And we're expecting to, ensure that we don't have to make budget cuts for our route cuts based on budgets because of these carbon reduction program funds, which can be used like our CMAQ funds up here. $4 million. It's an increase. And we did that to ensure we would have the money for the operations. If we cover operations, we can use CMAQ funds for admin, maintenance, those types of things down the chart. But all this to say is that we also moved the GMT Direct Flex. When they say we get $2 million in a resolution for Burlington, they get more like $6.5 million because of the flex of $4 million plus the state $2 million. And we're generally over budget on that, whether it was 3.5 and next year we might have to be more than that $4 million. Again, trying to help them bridge their budget gap that they are projecting as well. State funds down here at the 10.007, that's up from 9.8 last year, about $200,000 increase. So, my auditor. So that's really in a nutshell where we are. This operating here on formula funds and recovering job access, those are basically all used for operations. Most rural states, would have these funds for operations and these funds for capital, and that's their program. 10.5 plus some state. We've got, a much more robust program, and this 8.25 is what we thought we would be bringing in 26 from the low-no $37 million awards as we wait for deliveries, better specifications. And so we're trying to take a snapshot of those.
So
Yes.
we've drawn down completely all of the formula funds that we're entitled to. Is with everything going on at the federal level as we're looking forward, is there anything on hold?
Not at this time. We are on our way to Boston next Wednesday to have one-on-one meetings with our Region 1 office at FTA to just ensure that we've established clear communications, expectations, and trying to get a read on anything that they can indicate for us to just better prepare for. They've been nothing short of good faith partners today.
So, but my request would be that as soon as you have something, if there anything looks like it's in trouble, that we know.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And at this point, why don't we switch gears, let the others speak? I really, personally, and there may be others around the table that do the direct route pieces. I don't understand the financing of how we draw down what can be Medicaid, what it is. And we'll want you back here to talk about that. I am worried that we aren't looking ahead and saying, clearly in some contraction of medical services across the state in the delivery. I'll give you an example. I'm on the board of an FQHC that we just closed a medical office in Stowe. And so the people that will be left behind if there are huge Medicaid cuts in healthcare will be our poorest. And the only alternative that I can see is us providing more rides. And so I want to at least understand what the field looks like, how the money goes in and where that is. Because if we're thrust into a new world with huge Medicaid cuts and contraction of services, as is happening in my county right now, we're going to have to provide more rides.
We're aware of those dynamics and happy to discuss those in the next time. Thank you so much for the time.
But specifically, that's an area that I would be interested in, at least understanding how the funding streams work.
Okay, Thank you.
So if you could get ready, because Megan's gonna be after you, and it sounds like the middle of next week, you're gonna be someplace that we want you to be to figure out what might
Yeah.
happen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Hi, Jim's on the screen, you're there, however you guys wanna proceed.
Thanks, Jim. You're muted.
Talking, but you're muted.
The cardinal sin of being by Zoom. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to come before the committee.
So are you all with Jim going first?
Sure.
Okay,
Since he
I
did.
feel
go ahead.
funny picture talking over your head, Kevin. I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity. I first want to say thank you to everybody in the room. You guys are obviously all incredible transit supporters and fans. And you're clearly behind the understanding of the need for public transportation, the impact we have, and that makes a huge difference. You brought up a lot of questions during Ross's testimony, and I just wanted the opportunity to fill in some of the gaps from provider perspective. First of all, I guess maybe on the service cuts, the route performance cuts that has been a big part of the conversation earlier. I do want to emphasize that, I've been in this for 23 plus years, and we've never been told by the Agency of Transportation that we had to cut any particular routes or services. There's always been conversations about performance. Those metrics have changed over the years as well. But we are well aware when our routes are performing well. We're well aware when our routes are not performing well. Most providers are doing self-evaluations to begin with, looking at their routes and how they're performing, and are actively engaging in their communities, looking to make changes. After that, VTrans certainly comes to us and says if something is underperforming. You saw some of the routes on that list belong to us, Tri-Valley Transit. We work with them, we make changes. Ultimately, we might have to make segments. When I was growing up, my parents had a blueberry farm, and I have many images of my dad in the wintertime going out to prune the bushes. I look at this as a similar exercise. You prune the bushes to make sure that they can be more productive going forward in the future. I think that's the process we're going through right now in transit, looking at those low performance routes, not denying that there aren't service needs, but looking to find, are there more effective ways to do that? Obvious example is, if you can replace a relatively empty bus with timely dial-a-ride service, that's a cheaper way to do it. So, I think that your concerns are very much appreciated. I do feel like it's not necessarily the crisis that it may have felt like when some of the first press releases came out. I think certainly GMT has sparked a lot of controversy and upset viewpoints. But I think from the rural perspective, and certainly for Addison County, Orange County, Northern Windsor counties where we serve, we have been working closely with the communities and looking at our own routes. Some examples of how we are becoming more efficient and finding our own portion of those cuts on our commuter routes, as was made clear in Ross's testimony. Everybody around Vermont, everybody around the nation actually has seen a reduction in commuter ridership. We're still at probably 67% of the commuter route numbers pre-COVID. So as an example, going down the 89 corridor, which was one of the routes that was cited for us, we currently run 3 commuter runs every morning, 3 every afternoon. There have been times due to the labor market shortages when we haven't had enough drivers. We've been forced to run 2 runs in the morning and afternoon. We found that hasn't decreased ridership, actually. Those riders have adjusted. It may not be as convenient for them, but they have not been abandoned, and they have not abandoned the service. So when we look at evidence like that, we say, there are opportunities to create more efficient and cost-effective services. So I really just want to emphasize that from our perspective, certainly from Tri-Valley Transit, and I would want Caleb to speak for RCT. This is not something that we are feeling under supported by the Agency of Transportation. I think it is part of the natural process and evolution of looking at services. We've been part of that change in services as well, looking at different markets. Route 7 corridor would be one example where I'd say we've certainly seen a decrease in our commuter ridership, but we've been fortunate to reach out and partner with a lot of schools along the Route 7 corridor. And there's been a lot of discussion about education and the cost impact of education. And the House Committee has been asking, how can transit potentially help augment or supplement changes in transportation for school-age kids? Tri-Valley Transit does that a lot already. The number of kids that are riding on our Route 7 service, for example, have stabilized that route. We're not looking at, underperforming segments there. You've had questions around microtransit. Ross mentioned in Middlebury that we had replaced our generic or our traditional fixed route service with a combination. I know that was a question you asked Senator Harrison. So we do remain fixed route on the spine going down Route 7 in Middlebury, and we augment that with the microtransit service surrounding the spine. We've seen a 20% increase in ridership since the introduction of microtransit. So we look at that as a success and a good investment. And the cost per trip for us is going down as that continues to grow and as we continue our marketing efforts. Senator Westman, you also raised the question around hospitals, and in particular, you named Gifford, which is in one of our service areas. We see this as an incredibly important issue and crisis. The report that came out from last summer, advocating for reductions in these hospitals, including Gifford, that does, as you named, have a serious impact on the needs for transportation. Sometimes that can get overlooked. People look at it and say, we need savings in the hospitals, but don't understand that that's shifting costs onto transit providers or onto the families themselves. So we are definitely in a need where we need to continue meeting those needs, growing our dial-a-ride services. We have worked really hard on our volunteer end. I know Caleb and his team have worked very hard on their volunteer end. There is a shortage of volunteers around the state as well. So we are continually looking for ways that we can be innovative to meet the service needs, keep the costs down, but there are real impacts to those areas when, whether it's cutting services at hospitals or school consolidation. We play a critical role in helping to be part of the process, and if we aren't taken into consideration, we could be overwhelmed with demands with the inability to respond. I know Senator White, you asked also about, how does the legislature engage in the budgeting process? Certainly, we are always available and ready to come before any committee and talk about it early in the process. We have historically come before the committees if we have felt a need for budget adjustment support. And we're always happy to engage in these conversations at any point in the process. I would say typically when the Agency of Transportation and the providers are not in synchronicity, we have been bold enough to speak up. I recall probably 15 plus years ago when Chairman Westman, you were with the House Committee and you challenged us to fill a room full of riders and advocates when we were faced with a multi-million-dollar shortage in funds for replacing buses. We did that, and you were very supportive of those funds at that time. So when we need to speak up, we're willing to and will. I would say that over the years we've worked very collaboratively with the agency, and we don't tend to raise our hands and ask to be before the committee if we feel like we are working well with the agency and our needs are being met. I will pause it there and certainly take any questions. I'm trying to be cognizant of the time, and happy to expand on anything I've said, any other questions you've had, or anything else.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Moulton. I think this has actually been the most frustrating and kind of confusing part of this whole discussion is what I hear from constituents is services are being cut. This is bad. This is having a negative impact on me and my family directly. And then we haven't had a clear ask from the public transit providers to remedy that issue. So there, and I understand what you're saying around we're supportive of the budget as is. Essentially, we agree with our partners at the state level, but it's confusing and tense because I'm not able to articulate to my constituents a strategy for resolving it because my expectation would be that the public transit providers would articulate that for us and advocate for that. And what I'm hearing from you in particular is you should not expect that. We will not be doing that this year. So I'm wondering if you could clarify, we haven't gotten a clear ask from the public transit providers on what you need compared to what we're seeing for cuts. It sounds like you're accepting of the cuts. You see this as pruning the bush of services. And while that might be in disagreement with what I'm hearing from individual constituents, it sounds like collectively you are accepting of these changes. But I also haven't heard a clear articulation of why you're okay with those. And B, if there is an alternative strategy that we should be funding you more. So I guess I'm just really
Right.
hard for us to make the case to support you if we're not being asked to do that clearly.
So
Sure.
I think-
I appreciate, okay. I appreciate that perspective, Senator. You as a committee have even spoken just, a few minutes ago about, what is going to be happening in the future, the risk of federal funds. We are not blind to what's going on in Washington, D.C. We're not blind to what's going on in the state of Vermont. There has been a tremendous amount of pressure on the tax burdens for Vermonters. That was evident in the election results last fall. We understand there is demand. We always understand that there is more demand than we'll probably ever be able to meet. We look at it as we are partners in this process. We have to be smart with taxpayer dollars. It does not make sense to run, a bus with one or two riders. It's not that we're saying we don't want to serve those riders. It's saying that that may not be the most effective way to do it. We need to look at new and innovative ways of doing that. Even the fact that we can see we're running 3 commuter runs pre-COVID when there were lots of commuters, those routes could operate with fuller buses. It made sense to have 3 runs. When it gets to, that point where we can do it with 2 buses, we should be doing it with 2 buses. We've been under cost pressures for, a long time, and we have worked really hard at all levels, whether that's at the local levels or with the Agency of Transportation, and even helping, partner with the agency when it's leveraging federal dollars to get more funds into the state. We are a very well-funded state. So I think we're trying to find that balance, Senator. It's not that we're not hearing from constituents. It's that we are looking to find what are the most cost-effective ways that we can provide this service. Recognizing also that even if you stacked a pile of money in front of us, we still have challenges to recruit enough volunteers, to recruit enough CDL drivers, to even purchase buses. You've heard over the past couple of years that bus manufacturers have really failed in their ability to provide us with timely buses. Ross spoke earlier about the percentage of vehicles that are in poor condition. When we are we have to keep 2 or 3 vehicles in our fleet sometimes to function as if it's one full-time vehicle equivalent because they're old, they have 300,000 miles on them, but we cannot get replacements. And it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of the inability of the industry to deliver. So I think, the complications are probably bigger than you have heard before. I perceive it very much as we are always looking to figure out how to provide the service and being aware of what the service demands are. We know that we operate in a finance constrained, revenue constrained environment that may become more revenue constrained. And like you, we don't want to be back here next year talking about making service cuts to productive routes because the money just doesn't exist. So I think it's
So I
we-
guess
yeah.
I would just say, Mr. Moulton, it would be very helpful if you could have a clear ask on this at some point, because maybe it's for next year, but you have folks at AOT you could speak to, but you also have elected leaders you could speak to, and I don't think the dialogue has been open, but I saw that Senator Harrison had a question, so.
Yeah, that's okay with the chair. Are you good?
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So Jim, thank you for being here. I very much appreciate the pruning analogy because I certainly don't want to waste public funds and we will always be constrained. And it's really important that we do the best job that we can. That's so important. So I completely agree. My current frustration, as opposed to my long-term frustration, it has to do with this was presented to, you know, to the public and to us as a sudden action. And I think what the legislature did last year with GMT and looking at the routes, I think that has been a really good process, and that's been a thoughtful, calm, reasonable process that we've been given updates for, and it's making sense to me so far, and I think that's important. This presented as a short-term emergency, basically, and probably part of the problem is that the legislature doesn't hear from you all enough on just standard procedures and how things work. I really wish we had better information. And if you could just please think about this on the benefits of transit. We only talk about the costs. We don't talk about what it saves people, like getting kids to school, employment. There's so many benefits to transit, but they're not as quantifiable as the costs, but they are quantifiable. So if you folks could think about how to start having that be one of our metrics is the benefit. And then I'm gonna have to go in a couple minutes just to another meeting.
But we need to
But I'm gonna
let
be
you
late.
speak.
Yeah, but
Please.
just one other thing I want to mention.
Sure.
Is when the federal dollars start to diminish, which is very likely, there are also federal constraints that hopefully will diminish with those dollars. Like, for example, there's constraints about mixing school rides and regular rides. So please be alert to opportunities. I know that's hard to think about just because we're all really tense about what might happen, but there will be opportunities. So just be alert to those opportunities, because we might be able to do things in a very different way, more effectively, using different resources. And hopefully the resources who are benefiting from service more, right? It's because we can identify those, especially businesses and economic development. So just please start thinking, and I'm not saying you're not thinking creatively, but just be alert, please, to those opportunities. And thank you very much for what you do. I'll stay for 1 second.
Thank you, Senator Harrison.
Caleb.
So for the record, my name is Caleb Grant from Rural Community Transportation. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Obviously, between Ross McDonald's presentation and Jim Moulton's kind of addressing some of the localized concerns, one thing I think both in Senator White and Senator Harrison, in your questions, speak specifically to the roles between the state and the localized providers. Public transportation is interesting in the sense that it's almost an infinitely a scalable resource, right? And so as regional providers, our responsibility is to make the most efficient use of the funds you make available. The specific route, I don't really view route cuts directly correlated with reduction in service. In the past 2 years, we at RCT have looked at routes that have been underperforming, and we have, to use the term, we've cut them. And at each year, it has resulted in a 20% increase in rides given. I think it's efficient use of dollars. If an agency were to exercise zero-based budgeting, oftentimes those routes wouldn't even rise to the surface. So if we kind of get beyond the endorsement effect of holding on, and I want to recognize that in order to receive a route, it's a 3, 4, sometimes 8-year process. So there's certainly a validity to sunk costs of wanting to look at routes and say, you know, it's unlikely that we're going to get another route in the future. So the preservation of that is critical. But if we as good stewards of public funds look at that and say this is not the most efficient use of our funds, I will speak briefly in defense of the route performance report. I think in addition to its kind of time benefits of having that baseline that you can refer to, there are a number of ways that you can address an underperforming route. You can reduce vehicle size, you can address costs, you can adjust hours. In all of those adjustments, which there are few, public transportation is extremely vulnerable to cost disease, where your productivity remains the same as your costs increase. So we have to take advantage of those few opportunities where there are areas for efficiency and increased productivity. And I think looking at underperforming routes is a critical part of that. If I could, I'd also like to address briefly the point brought up by Chairman Westman as we think about the upcoming changes in the healthcare industry. I'll speak specifically to the example you brought up in Lamoille County. We had a regional provider going through financial strategic decisions, closed a practice. Working with that provider, RCT is able to change its fixed route service in the Morrisville Stowe area so that individuals who were attending that clinic can now get to the main practice in Morrisville as well as Copley Hospital. This is a great example of a working partnership to find efficiencies. But the part of that hasn't been shared is that slight adjustment will now cost RCT $5,000. And so you start to see on a very specific small example, areas where industry and nonprofit, where industries and nonprofits are making strategic financial decisions, and oftentimes those costs are externalized to public transportation. You see it in our service area in the closure of pharmacies. I can look at RCT's manifest for the next day and tell you what the bed capacity of our local hospitals are.
Interesting.
Because we know where people are going. If I have drivers going to Albany, if I have drivers going to Burlington, going to Boston, going to Dartmouth. There was a period last year where if you had a heart attack in our main office, you were going to Albany to be serviced. And all of a sudden, you know, your pickup may be an RCT ride. So there's an enormous amount of implications to external decisions, which are going to be absorbed by the budget that you have been presented. And I'll just,
I would just break in here for a second.
Mhm.
If I'm, and you both of you represent areas that have had rural community hospitals that are in trouble. Randolph, North Country are both hospitals that are in deficit that have been highlighted by the Green Mountain Care Board for suggestions for reductions. I don't know if that will happen. I don't know where that is. I have some fear with federal Medicaid cuts coming down from the federal government that might happen. How do, and what you have just mentioned is if a route changes, for example, LHP just closed the Stowe family practice, and it does create it, but it has ripple effects to the service you offer.
Mhm.
If that comes, the real question is, how do we put together a budget that reflects those changes and gets those people that need to travel to, their, appointments, their dialysis, for example? How do I make sure that we're on a track to be able to look at that and adjust to make that? We're now putting together a budget, but if I have federal Medicaid cuts that come in place in October, it's partway through our budget process, and I can't be leaving people from October to next July sitting there with no service. So I'm just struggling to start to figure out, how do I have this conversation and at least be in a position where I'm ready to move?
So, and I'll bring Jim in here, but I think, initially it's bridging the gap between the Transportation Committee and the Health Committee. Jim and I live in two different worlds, right? We are parts of VPTA, which negotiates a Medicaid contract with an entirely different committee that has enormous implications on the transportation here.
Yeah.
The scenario with Medicaid is, if we have less people eligible for Medicaid, that actually means less rides for us, which creates capacity opportunities. But many of those individuals are going to have to shift over to O&D, which is already completely strained by critical care. Our O&D service, when I began, was completely focused on, getting people to their annual checkups, getting people to the grocery shop, doing all these types of things. Currently, it is almost entirely consumed by dialysis trips and adult day. And so I think looking at a third category in defense of your O&D program and bridging that gap between the Health Care Committee and Transportation Committee would be critical.
And I just want to say, I think that to Senator Harrison's point earlier, the missing piece to all of this is that these are elderly individuals for a lot of these circumstances, or individuals who have no other option for how to get there. They're either going to be in their home, not moving to access healthcare, which is going to cost us later more because they're going to have emergency care, or the loneliness epidemic that we keep hearing about, where people don't have, like, adult day is just a foundational part of people being able to stay in community. So I think that this is a missing part of it. When I talk to people about why they don't go to the Bugby Senior Center, it's because they can't find a ride to the Bugby Senior Center. So if people don't have that social fabric, or they don't have a younger child who can drive them or lives in the area, that just makes them fall right through the cracks. So I totally respect what we heard from Mr. McDonald earlier around how the on-demand services are the most expensive. But they're expensive because they're the last resort, and it's not going to always be profitable. That's just the point I'm trying to make. It's not going to be profitable to always support vulnerable populations. Like, it's just not going to turn a dime, and that's okay. So I think what we're asking for is advocacy to explain the benefits, so we can articulate a case for why we might need to increase revenue, because we haven't received that yet. And I think that's different, and I appreciate you refining the problem, which is not cutting roots, but I think access to the service is what we're at a place that we need to protect now. So cutting roots, I see as a different conversation. Sounds like that's not the main issue. It's access to the service. And we are no longer expanding access to that service through, like, the Mobility Transportation Innovation Grant Program going away. All of that is ending, and all of that service is going away. So I think if you can articulate better for us as a collective what service is being reduced, we will be less fearful of the cuts to routes, because that communicates to me a cut in service. But I'm also hearing about cuts to service. So I just need the problem refined and a more clear case made for us to be able to articulate to our colleagues, because I think you have broad support, at least in the Senate, on this topic. So that's my grant for today. My first grant.
It looks like, Jim, you've got something to say. We got about 5 more minutes and then we can move to the next. But this is not our last go around with public
Thank-
transit.
Thank you, Chairman. Very quickly, I will say that historically, the Dial-A-Ride program, there's probably not quite an infinite demand, but we have never been able to meet the ultimate demand on the Dial-A-Ride program in the 20+ years I've been doing this. There's always a need for more funding. It is the most expensive way to provide the service, just because usually they are one-person trips. We do try to consolidate 2 people, 3 people whenever possible, but the very nature of, that we're reaching out to the very, the most remote riders, getting them to their, whether it's medical appointments or grocery shopping or adult day or anything like that. It is an expensive mode to do that. That is clear that we need to balance that against how important is that, those things you just talked about, Senator White, the loneliness factor, is it just cost shifting back onto the medical system through emergency room visits? So those are hard things to quantify, and those are ultimately the kinds of decisions that I think you, the legislature, are the ones in the driver's seat to make that. So what I'm hearing from you in part is you want to hear more from us about demand, even if we aren't necessarily saying, we're pounding our fists asking for more money. It's more like, tell us what that looks like to provide more service, because you are hearing from individual constituents. So that's how I'm hearing that.
Thank you. You definitely heard what I said, because I think what is, as I pointed out earlier, has been confusing is I'm hearing from constituents who are not happy because they feel like they're losing something. And then what I'm hearing from you is, oh, no, we're not losing stuff. It's bad, but we're not losing stuff. And so that makes it very hard for me to make a case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to kind of acknowledge and recognize that I think my point was that there may be individual loss, but totality of gain. I'll use the Newport example. We recently transitioned a fixed route service in Newport into a microtransit service. At the time of transfer, the Newport service had about 45 regular riders. Those were individuals who depended on it. They used it actively. Since that transition, the microtransit is a less than ideal solution for those 45 individuals. The microtransit now has 1,200 diverse users.
Oh, wow.
So in totality, we've increased services and expanded our scope. But for those 45 individuals, I share a lot of empathy for their experience of loss in public transportation service.
Explain, yeah.
That's what Senator Harrison was talking about, when you change from a fixed route to a microtransit, there are some people that are disadvantaged by this.
And I will note that many of those riders, the thing they have identified, because we engaged with all of them, the thing that they identified as feeling the greatest loss in fixed route transportation was the social engagement, not necessarily the functional purpose of transportation.
I hate to end this, but I think we need to move on right now. We do need to better understand the direct service piece, how the funding works for that. If we are facing cuts, I think we need to start to think about that and what that might look like. So you're going to hear from Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Good, Jim.
Patrick, we've got about a half an hour, and Damien's going to come back with the amendment. He's gone upstairs to be with House Transportation. He's running back and forth.
For you.
Name, rank, serial number.
Name ranks.
How I sent it. Yep. And how
Just a second. It is.
you got it.
Are you done? Oh, good. I do have a question. How's your counterpart's vacation going? Is there anything we can do to? I wasn't gonna say that, but you know, I would thought maybe a little monkey wrench down there. And have you
I think
texted
you've
her
already
at all?
communicated,
Yeah, I think we
how
get
you feel
everything.
about a vacation.
You know, it's nice of her to go away when we're right in the middle of everything.
But she's in DC, right?
No, she's
Oh.
skiing.
Undisclosed location.
Undisclosed, okay. Yeah, I saw that.
Undisclosed skiing vacation.
Good thing she set up Patrick for success.
Okay, so, for the record, Pat Murphy, City Policy Director for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. Try to run through, these slides and just get to questions that you have, about sort of where we are at the moment. A couple of you have seen these, or many of these already, so we won't sort of dwell on them, but feel free to jump in. Where we are right now, so what's being proposed, what's been proposed back in 2023 is a mileage-based user fee for fully electric vehicles. So right now we're at about, as of start of this year, at about 18,000 plug-in electric vehicles. Of those, about 11,000 are fully electric. So we're probably right now, I think, we've got some more recent data from DMV that we're probably around 12,000 fully electric vehicles.
Is that in East Montpelier, that's the dark area in the center? No, that's. It doesn't matter. I can find out. Sorry,
I'm not gonna take
very provincial, like.
Yeah, okay.
So all of this began with, trying to figure out what to do with, what we've seen in a decline in revenues, and not just from, electric vehicles. At the time, the majority of this was coming, from fuel efficiency of the wider fleet. So a mileage-based user fee is a type of road charge. We have a gas tax attempting to serve as a proxy for the amount that a vehicle is using, but has become over time less of a reliable one. And then we've got a variety of flat fees that different states have enacted, and then this January we enacted a flat fee for plug-in electric vehicles that is now directed to EV charging infrastructure. This slide is just showing that a lot of the loss in fuel tax revenue has come over the past couple of decades from fuel efficiency. You see the bigger dip during the pandemic, which is just reduced vehicle miles traveled. But overall, you can see a downward trajectory of gallons used. This is to give a sense of where we are in terms of approaching the sort of 15% threshold of new vehicle sales being plug-in electric vehicles, where we saw this past fall, we basically hit that in October, but we've seen more of a leveling out. And so what remains to be seen is what are the impact of changes to federal policy over the next several months and years. This slide that we included in the presentation on transportation funding study. But just to give a sense, although the vast majority of the revenue we've lost over the past couple of decades has been to fuel efficiency, what we expect to see from here on out is that the majority of revenue will be through electrification. It's not collecting any sort of fuel tax.
What do you know, if any of this changes at the federal level? projection of the.
This was, no, this is, this was done for that transportation funding study. And we'll see whether the curve changes at all, but we were tracking very closely with a Valpo study that was done in 2020.
Right.
And based on numbers that we've seen since, there's not been a whole lot of drop in the EV adoption rate. You can see, just going back to February, we're back up to about 14% of new vehicle sales. Now, who has access to that? And that's a whole
That's
different
just one
question.
month that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there may be more changes to come.
So to back up, what was the historical loss? It's, your chart's good, but it would be nice if I had the numbers to fill in there.
Dollars.
Yeah, the dollars.
You do have it in.
You're in the
Funding
report
study.
there, yeah.
Which is,
Thank
So
you.
I'll get that to you. So yeah, and JFO provided some good slides last.
Yeah, they did.
We
Some really good slides.
So that's what's important to note here with this slide is that if you were to point backwards to like 2014, when I think the JFO estimated based on 2024 dollars, we'd be at like a 41 cent per gallon tax. Then you're looking at sort of in the intervening 10 years, a loss of like $20 million annually. So that's why I say it's important that your starting point is important, because if you're just starting from 2025, then it's going to seem, and your assumption is that you don't change the gas tax, then it's going to seem like most of the losses are due to electrification, whereas you're still falling behind in terms of fuel efficiency.
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I appreciate this and, but it seems like we have a gap of 317 million that's projected by the funding study. So I guess I'm wondering, this does seem like a reasonably small drop.
Is that the cumulative?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to,
Yeah, so
the estimated funding gap for unconstrained needs is approximately 317 million starting in FY 26.
yeah, so that's looking at both expenses and revenue.
Okay,
So it's projecting out, sort of if we were to, based on assumptions around, whether it's in different places, it's 3%. In some places, for example, construction is going to be more like 5% because of what inflation has been. That's projected out. What we would need that's far in excess right now of what our current budget is.
yes.
And then this is just looking at the revenue side of things. What are we losing from our baseline?
Okay, I understand what you're saying. So that number that I'm describing is like the missing need in total. And what you're describing is actually the specific amount of revenue, like declining, that we can expect, that we already have assumed in this. So this is on top of the $317 million that is expected.
No, the 300 million or so, that's the interaction between the two of where our revenue is going to be and where if we were to try and continue spending at those levels 10 years into the future, where would we be in terms of expenditures? But I think it's important to dive into those details of the transportation funding study and understand what that's trying to get at, which is a bigger picture sense of where are the gaps.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily, that isn't necessarily like proposed budgets for you know, the next 10 years, or even within the realm of possibility of being a proposed budget. Just
That's
because of
based
the
on- Okay,
order of magnitude that,
okay.
that we're talking about on the expense side of things.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. I think the reason I brought it up was this feels like a drop in the bucket compared to that number. So it's kind of like, wow, it seems like we're spending a lot of time focusing on this specific thing around EV drivers when we have a much greater, gigantic problem that is just gonna happen to us. So I guess that's my point of view. Thank you.
Sure. So, it will be, I mean, you know, when we're talking about earlier testimony, budget cuts and, you know, $1.5 million kind of range. I mean, that's what we're looking at, more than that in terms of revenue loss in 2026. So every bit matters. We're not proposing this as the way to solve all of the transportation fund issues. And I think we were very intentional about this being an important first step. That, you know, in order to be able to get something in place, you have to do what you can with what you have and build on that as simply as possible. The focus on electric vehicles in particular is if we're not collecting, at least we weren't throughout most of the time of this study, collecting any revenue for road usage. And so it's really, how do we get to a fairer point where we're not losing that funding? And given that our climate goals are working towards more electrification, being able to account for that in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, I think my only additional concern would be, you know, when I look at your charts around 10-year projections for revenue generation, it seems like this is an area that could be raising revenue consistently greater over time. And I worry that it will be put as an area that we just continue to, like a well that we just go to a lot. So that's my only concern is I don't want us to kind of go the other direction, because as we start to see gas tax revenue go down, that we then rely on increasing a mileage-based user fee cost because it is going up. If you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so we went through a study process and we came through some sort of principles that would guide us through the work. And one of those is that you know, a mileage-based user fee would be set to be net revenue neutral with what gas tax people are paying for fossil fuel vehicles. So that would be, and that's, you know, what we would be bringing back to you all in January for discussion around rate setting.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
We've got 15 minutes. I'd like to get through as much of this. The two questions I have is zero in on a little bit of the details on how you set the charge for that.
Sure.
And then some discussion about going beyond, because we're at the 2026.
I've never seen that chart.
Which?
One back.
The bubble.
Of the bubbles.
Okay, that's just describing the system generally, but
Yeah.
Do you want me
Let's
to-
get through this. I am gonna have questions if we decided to go miles traveled beyond that to start to replace the gas tax with the miles traveled. There are whole issues around that.
Yes.
We would wanna discuss, particularly, for example, you have a vehicle that's 15 miles to the gallon. If you go in and you just set a flat rate, they're probably going to benefit. And if you have something that's 40 miles to the gallon, how do I compare somebody with a 15 mile per gallon vehicle versus a 40 mile? I don't want to disadvantage the people that are on the higher end.
Yeah.
And, so I'm gonna want to discuss that next, but run through this so we can.
Okay, so I'll start sort of with the rate setting considerations and then, we can bounce around to where you
Okay.
want to go with that. And so just to be clear, what we propose and what's, been adopted in language in Act 6223,
Yep,
is just for electric vehicles. And there are reasons for that I think the chair has just highlighted, because when you start to move into, the rest of the vehicle, fleet, there are all kinds of different issues around border, interstate travel, and then the considerations that you've highlighted around fuel efficiency. So what we did is looked at, as part of our legislative report for last year, we looked at sort of the average miles per gallon of different vehicle classes, and then looked at high, medium, and low mileage scenarios, and then how we would come to set a rate for the mileage-based user fee.
You're,
go ahead.
you're still just talking about EV and if you're an RV.
Yes.
Okay, so you're not talking about doing it for the non-electric vehicles.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can see just in this column here, what the average amounts would be if you did a couple of different things. First, that you incorporate the cost of administrative costs into the fee, because you have with the fuel tax just a 1% admin fund, admin cost, maybe even less than that. With this, we assumed a 3.6% administrative cost. We're still building upon existing systems, upon the investments that have been made by the legislature and the DMV's core IT systems. But nonetheless, there are still additional costs to it. Then looking at, making sure that we're starting at the right point. We have lost a lot of revenue over the past 10 years because of the erosion of the gas tax. And so given that the last time that was updated was in 2014, 2013, we pointed backwards to that moment as a place that we felt like the legislature thought enough revenue had been raised to be able to meet transportation needs. So we use a fuel efficiency of the general fleet amount in calculating the mileage-based user fee that was at that time about roughly 20 miles to the gallon. Right now, we've increased to about 24 miles to the gallon. So, and then language that I think we would bring back to you in January would incorporate the cost of inflation, so that there'd be some sort of escalator that allowed this fee to track with the cost of inflation, given what we've seen in construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's exactly the point I was trying to raise earlier, is we are not connecting gas tax revenue to the increased inflation, but you're already suggesting that that's what we would do for EVs, which I'm wondering if you could explain why.
Well, I think because we've seen all kinds of costs in construction.
But why not do that for gas?
Yeah, I guess exactly, yeah.
Well, we're talking about a mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles, and that's sort of what the focus of the study has been.
Okay.
Getting to the gas tax is another question that was raised in the transportation funding study, is looking at how that was modeled out if you were to actually adopt an indexing of the gas tax for gas and diesel, what would that model out to
You're
be?
basically telling you, you're just following the instructions that were set out for you.
Well, I mean, that's what we do, yeah.
I,
Right.
I mean, ultimately, the decision is with the legislature.
I've been on transportation in about 6 years. so-
Yeah, I guess I would say personally, if I were in charge, which I'm not, I would not be supportive of EV mileage-based user fees having a connection to inflation as an increase over time amount. If folks who drive gas vehicles don't also have that connection for the fuel that they use. So that feels like a logical inconsistency. And I understand that you're thinking about it in these two different buckets of work. And what I'm telling you is I see both buckets of work and it's logically inconsistent. So I personally would not be in favor of that. So if that is the proposal for mileage-based user fee that you bring to us in January, I hope that we can have a discussion collectively before we get that language around something that would affect the gas tax as well. So that's not a point you need to respond to, but just a statement of preference.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can respond to it.
You don't have to if you don't want to, I mean.
Go ahead.
So, in order to get to a place where you want to be, you have to start somewhere. And that's the point of this proposal, is that we're starting somewhere. And we're developing something that begins to take into account the costs of inflation. And where the legislature goes with that, I think is entirely within your purview. So you are in charge of some things. And you know, we'll further discuss that in January. But I think what you've heard in testimony for the past several weeks is just the amount that we are losing due not only to fuel efficiency, but also to the high costs of inflation. And so that's what the agency is beginning to grapple with and propose.
Thank you.
Just because they propose it does not mean we have to dispose it.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with being on the transportation committee is oftentimes we're given things by the agency, by the DMV, and then it's like, oh, well, you can't really argue with it because it's already been presented to us. So I think that's the point I'm trying to make is if you are telling me in next January, you're bringing language that says inflation will be tied to an increased fee around mileage-based user fee, I will not be supportive of that if there's not corresponding language with a gas tax revenue piece. And I'm telling you that, so if one of 5 of these votes matters to you in this open dialogue, that in January, when you bring us language, I'm gonna have the same perspective. To be clear, but I am supportive of this proposal overall.
Okay. Let's keep going because Damien is on in 5 minutes. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but it's gonna take a lot more time than 5 minutes, so I'm sure we'll be talking about it.
I'm not saying it isn't. We need to get Damien because they have to, this is not the last. We're gonna hear this too. And we always go over whatever we schedule, so I'm trying to cut back on the schedule and have less things, so.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Mine is more of a response than a question, and I want to study my response a little
Oh,
further. Make sure I have it. You know, I do have thoughts, but we're gonna revisit it, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Keep going.
so, and I'm here often, so I can come back
Yeah.
and discuss it more. So if this is the direction that we had from the legislature in Act 62, is to begin collecting a mileage-based user fee for fully electric vehicles in July 1 of 2025. To also subject the plug-in hybrids to a flat fee. And then to continue working towards collecting or exploring the notion of a fee per kilowatt hour on public charging stations, which is a whole nother lengthy discussion that I think we can have another day. This is language that was taken up in the House Transportation Committee and for revision in this year's transportation bill. Obviously, to update the implementation date, which at the earliest would be July 1st of 2026. So we've had a federal grant that's been awarded to us in November. That's under review by the new administration for $3 million. And
So is that money on hold?
Yeah, what's under review?
all federal discretionary grants through FHWA were put under a 90-day review. We are still waiting to be able to work with FHWA and a grant agreement to actually access that funding.
When do we hit 90 days? Like, when will we know?
I don't have it marked in my calendar, but it's, began basically early February.
I'm more interested in, does that hold up your timetable?
So, it has, that's why we're pushing out the days, from
And,
July.
and
1st,
that pushed out
2025.
in the date is in the T-bill that the House has sent,
That's
about
right.
to send us.
That's right. So they're also working on alternative, funding sources for this. And House Appropriations is at least tentatively approved $1 million in general funds for it. But that would depend on, what we actually hear from FHWA to be able to implement this.
So is the 1 million if you don't get the 3 million, or is it?
Yep.
Thank you.
So that would then, we have 700,000 from the past two transportation bills. That was to be used as state match for the federal grant. So if there were another $1 million in general funds, we'd be able to sort of begin work in
So the
July.
1 million they have in their bill is general fund.
It's not in the transportation bill, it's in the appropriation bill. Yeah.
Where's the
Is
budget?
that, in our other committee,
Yes,
with that in the back of the bill and accounted for in their spending?
it's in there. It's not in the back of the bill, it's in the one times.
No. Okay, it's in the one time, but I was thinking about yesterday in our committee, we had
Our committee, which
Other-
our committee?
our afternoon
Okay,
committee,
did we have to?
our afternoon committee.
Yeah,
We had the bill presented to us in we had an accounting of, the bills that
it was in there.
it was in there. Okay, good.
Good job.
Great. Sorry, I missed it. Okay,
Okay, so,
so we'll have to
That's
come
the-
back to
that's the gist of
the
it
pieces.
is that, we'll have an update.
You're moving to
hopefully in the next-
your goal is to implement it by July 2026.
That would-
January and get legislation and then start working on January 26th. When would people actually see the fee?
We'd want to start working on it this summer, and then we'd have to bring some language to you all.
January.
In January, and then
And
you
then-
would implement in July 1st of 2026.
That would be the earliest possible time.
But I need more time once we authorize it to actually get it up and running.
It depends on when or if it was authorized in statute.
If they have $3 million less to do the work, then our timetable's gonna be pushed back.
And if you need IT changes and things like that,
That's the bulk of what the funding would be for.
those always go quick and under budget.
Well,
You're a dreamer.
they have actually for the
He's
DMV
the dreamer.
IT4 systems. I mean,
Yeah,
they have been on time and on budget, so. And that's what we would be working with,
no, sometimes.
so.
That's why the next chart, you've got this one has, to be determined.
Yes, this has changed several times over the past couple of years.
TBD to keep getting added.
So that's what we're working towards, and be happy to sort of come back and go in more depth on how it would work. And the details of the proposal that was awarded by FHWA.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have seemed like I was against a mileage-based user fee. I'm not. I'm very in favor of a mileage-based user fee. I think it is the future. I think it's what we need to do as a society. And I also think it's the right direction for electric vehicles as well versus a registration fee. So I just wanted to put that out there and say thank you for the sheer amount of time that you have done. And we should be proud because Vermont is actually on the leading edge of this conversation. So I do hope that electric vehicles can be a part of that conversation. I just hope that in our hurry in that direction that we don't end up causing an incentive to continue to be in ICE vehicles because of a system that makes it more expensive to be an electric vehicle driver in a unorganic way. You know, I'm okay if my electric rate goes up and I have to pay more for fuel. That's fine. I respect that. But to have an artificially imposed government policy to increase the cost of my fuel essentially, or to increase the cost of my driving to meet the needs of a program that other vehicle drivers are not meeting is just flipping on its head the whole criticism that we've had of EV drivers to the other direction. So I do hope that as we continue to identify this, that a part of this is also addressing how we can include gas vehicles in the future. So I'm wondering where on this timeline do gas vehicles enter a mileage-based user fee?
So part of our grant work and so we're not just, so we were awarded the $3 million, but we were also part of a multi-state grant with the Eastern Transportation Coalition. We have a much smaller pot within that award. And if that were to move forward, we would be working with other states and figuring out what are the next steps from a mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles that is just done through the vehicle inspection station odometer reading.
Yep.
To how it evolves to account for the different issues that the chair raised earlier about border travel, interstate travel, and figuring out how you then apportion revenue to deal with the amount of funding that you're not capturing from out-of-state travel. And so what I was explaining earlier is just that this proposal is intended to be a first step.
Mhm.
And so sometimes in order to get to where you want to end up, you need to take a smaller step.
Yes.
And if you think of this mileage-based user fee as a pilot that would need to be done to figure out all the other issues before moving towards the rest of the fleet, then, you know, we're several years away from that being able to happen.
Okay, so there's not a clear, because I think the reason I asked that question is we clearly have a gas tax revenue issue. And we need to resolve that. And it sounds like us using mileage-based user fee to resolve that for gas vehicles, who are the main driver of our reductions, is not likely to happen in the next however many years. Is there a year at which, even in your most hypothetical, you see gas vehicles being a part of a mileage-based user fee in Vermont? Like, when is the hypothetical year that you would say?
So the other state that is working on this is Hawaii. And
They're kind of all in one.
they were also awarded a grant, and they have fewer complexities in some ways, in others they have more. They are working towards a similar timeframe in terms of having a mandatory mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles by 2027. They have language within their bill that points to 2032 or 2033 to think about how they transition the whole fleet.
Okay.
Because there are just so many different issues that will come up in trying to implement it for 500, 600,000 vehicles, that it's much better to do what you know needs to be done now and work out whatever issues there might be, with a smaller population than trying to go straight towards the end solution which you've articulated.
Yes, I completely agree. And just so we all understand, you in your funding study at large, put that the estimated funding gap would be $582 million by 2033. So that wouldn't even be, so I guess I'm just trying to understand, this is not a solution to our problem in that way. We're not going, this is not going to fix the problem that we've had the drumbeat of this session, because it's such a long-term timeline before we actually gained enough revenue. So it's,
I will say that there is not going to be one proposal that fixes any of the transportation.
Oh, give me a wand and I'll fix it.
because I do feel like AOT has kind of been saying that this would be the solution to the problem. And I think I'm starting to recognize that that's
It's a solution to one problem. I don't think that the agency has proposed this as the fix for everything.
Oh, I apologize. When the Secretary of Transportation came at the beginning of the year and I asked him about gas tax revenue, he said that the main solution was a mileage-based user fee over time. So I had kind of put that in my brain as the solution that was being put forward by AOT to resolve that. So I apologize if I had misunderstood or mischaracterized. So thank you for the correction.
Hate to give you the boot, but we've got functionally an amendment that I need to
That sounds fine.
finally run to, well, don't run out so happy. It won't be your last meeting here. And don't go very far because I want to grab you for something.
It's good.
Yeah, but we have to get this amendment taken care of. And I think that we just want to run by the committee because I think we approved it. Please.
Thank you, Chris.
Well,
New amendment.
Oh, it's much shorter. We like that.
Happy to help.
Oh, there's only 8.
Yes.
There's only 8, so I added 6 instances of amendment. You guys are. Was able to.
The first is the EVs for county.
Yep, so that's EVs for county. Second instance of amendment is changing the reader assistance heading. Third instance of amendment is deleting the word used from the name of the study committee. Fourth instance of amendment is again deleting the word used from the study committee and adding the word purchase and use to clarify that it's motor vehicle purchase and use tax that we're talking about. The fifth instance of amendment is striking out the word used in subsection A. And then the sixth instance of amendment is again striking out the word used in subsection C.
I'm feeling used.
Seventh instance of amendment is getting rid of an and at the end of a subdivision because we've added 2 new subdivisions. And then the eighth instance of amendment adds those subdivisions and then renumbers the last subdivision, which has that onboard diagnostic light language in it as subdivision 5.
And ask you a question when these instances of amendment, like saying striking out the word and following that. But then sometimes you'll see it as you'll have that language and will be struck.
So we show what's shown in the document. So if the struck out word is shown struck out in the document, we show it struck out.
So what it seems like it's sometimes an amendment, you'll see it struck out, but this says just they will strike it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So when is
So-
it one and when is it the other?
It is, you look at what's in the underlying document and how the word is shown there, whether it's underlined or struck, and that's what you show in the amendment.
So this amendment doesn't show it being struck. Says we're gonna strike it, but it doesn't say show it's.
Right, so imagine this, if the underlying amendment were striking out the word and, or the underlying bill were striking out the word and there, the and shown at here would show the strikeout.
Right.
But because it was actually adding that word, we have to show it as being added here because we're telling them exactly what it is in the underlying bill that's being removed and what we're replacing it with. So the underlining and strikeout you see here just tracks the way it's supposed to appear, or the way it actually appears in the underlying bill and what we're replacing with it with the way that will appear. The words around it actually tell you what we're doing with it. So you would see if you were doing something where you struck the whole section and then, or a whole subsection, and then you pop new language in, then you might see strike out and underline and unstruck out or underlined words in there. But in this case, because of the way we've drafted it in this particular style of amendment, we tell them we have to show what's actually shown in the document to ensure that the Senate Secretary's office understands exactly what they're removing.
You could use that by striking it out.
Uh,
I'll talk to you.
Within the drafting manual, I'm not allowed to do that
All right.
unless I go back to the format that I used in the last version of this amendment. And pull up whole subsections or subdivisions.
You'd have to have the whole section.
Right, so by just doing individual words and pockets, I can't do that. That's where the difference comes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is everyone okay with having their names on the amendment? I know Senator Harrison is not here.
I think we all agree with that.
Okay, great.
And I will make sure that the President Pro Tem knows that he's already been here to visit and asked if. Megan, can you make sure that this is upstairs?
I was told that the person reporting it has to bring it to the Senate
Okay.
Secretary's office.
All right, I marked mine up so I know what needs to be said on the
I think I
floor.
brought extra
I have-
copies, so.
Get out of line.
Thank you for taking it upstairs.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The two issues that the public transit and mileage space, we're going to have to. We'll be back around with this. And spending a fair amount.
We're gonna get some real mileage out of it.
Oh, the bane.
Wow, guys.
Rough morning.
Bane.